Good morning, boys and girls. Sometimes my stories get tweaked a little bit to more like the gospel according to Chris. I hope that's okay. Sometimes they seem a little bit more interesting. The other thing I noticed, too, is that music sounds great up here. And whenever I'm standing over here, singing is not my spiritual gift, by the way. Anything but. I did not get the singing genes in my family. But anyway, whenever I'm standing up here and Steve Nixon is singing in my ear, I sound so much better. I do. I almost sound like I'm singing in key and in tune. And so if you ever hear my mic on and I'm singing, cut it off, okay? Cut it off. It does not need to happen that way, okay? So here we are at week 2. The sermon series, I guess we could call it everything you wanted to know about Pastor Chris, but we're afraid to ask. I want to say thank you again, though. We had just a wonderful first full week in Princeton, and thank you for making me and my family feel so welcome in our church and in your city. I went to the fair this week, had a good time. I guess we did something right because our daughter Amanda came home 2 weekends in a row. She came home Friday night, which she rarely ever does. I don't know if it was us, the church, the city, or Dustin Lynch at the fair. She came back with a couple of her friends to see the concert, but nevertheless, we'll take what we can get. I also want to thank you for kind of indulging me as I weave my story into my sermons for the first few weeks. Last week, I shared with you that I spent the first 18 years of my life in a city called Somerset, Kentucky, southeast Kentucky, and I attended Pleasant Hill Baptist Church, and it truly was. It was a wonderful place to grow up, and it was a wonderful church to grow up in. Whenever I was a junior, or a freshman or a sophomore in high school, I was blessed to learn a poem. Blessed, forced, they sometimes get interchangeable. Forced to learn a poem by Robert Frost, by a wonderful English teacher. And the poem goes like this: 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood. And sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then I took the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and it has made all the difference. So I graduated from high school in 1989, and I did what any good little Baptist boy would do. I packed up my things, and I moved 750 miles south to Daytona Beach, Florida. I attended Daytona Beach Community College, and I have to admit to you, I'm being serious. I did not hand out tracts on the beach, and I was not witnessing in the streets of Daytona Beach, Florida. For me, spring break extended 12 months of the year. I did get a degree, and I worked 30 to 40 hours a week so I could pay my living expenses. I was somewhat responsible at times, but I promise, I confess to you, I did not break any records for class participation or study time logged in the library while I was there. As a matter of fact, the classes that I most signed up for were those that the professors had a reputation of saying at the beginning of class, your attendance has no bearing on your grade in this class. Because I wanted to spend my time on the beach. And so there you have it. My hiatus. You perhaps have the only pastor in history, maybe just the Indiana Conference, that has a degree from Daytona Beach Community College. It was actually in business administration. It was not in sand and surf. So, I think I was called to be a pastor at a very young age, as I shared with you. And as I shared with the kids, I was Jonah to the nth degree. I mean, I was scared to death that God wanted me to be a pastor. I mean, honestly, I think it's because, see, I know me, and I know that I just don't measure up. I mean, I'm not that holy. I am just an ordinary guy. And the pastors that I knew, they lived these holy lives, and people put them up on a pedestal. And well, they also wore polyester suits and wingtip shoes. And I didn't do that. And I mean, I don't like to read. I'm not an academic. I am not that scholarly. And I'm not that holy. And I'm not perfect. And so, like Jonah, I ran. I'm convinced now I ran. I ran as far away from God as I could get. And I wanted nothing to do with church people or anything to do with church. I think now, looking back, it was probably because it reminded me of this calling that I wanted so desperately to run from. And so, thus began my crooked path. I mean, why is it that when we look back at our lives, rather than when we're looking forward, it's so much easier to see God's hand at work? My mother says that it's a shame you have to live your life to learn it. I'm starting to figure out what she meant by that. And why is it that whenever we look at everyone else's lives, their lives are categorized by clean lines, and neat edges. But when we look closely at our own lives, they're messy. They're broad. They're crooked paths. And in my case, not just, little bitty crooks and weaves. Sometimes it's entire U-turns in my life. Why is it that some of us, me included, made or maybe continue to make decisions or engage in behaviors that don't honor God at all, and lead us down those crooked paths? For me, it was the exact opposite direction. We string together a string of poor decisions, and we'd like for it to have a positive outcome, but that just doesn't happen, does it? I mean, we follow our own selfish desires. And most of the time, or at least in my case, for a long time, my life contradicted what it was that God wanted me to do. I mean, I had the mantra, if it feels good, do it. I mean, who cares if God would approve anyway, right? Because, truth, sin, that's all hogwash. And I mean, truth is up to each one of us, isn't it? And sin, what's sin to me may not be sin to you. At least that was how I lived my life. But that's not what the Bible says, is it? The Bible's very clear. It says the wages of sin is death, or sin leads to destruction, or poor decisions will lead you down a crooked path. And then Jesus is very clear also, isn't he? He says, what? I am the way, the truth, and the life. In my case, to be blunt, I loved my sin more than I loved my God. And the Bible's also very clear, isn't it? It tells us that anything, any person, anything, any possession, any tool, any behavior that we put before God is idolatry. My indulgence or my overindulgence at many times, pleasing myself was my idol. I think that's a sermon for another day. There I go getting on another crooked path. I'll get back to my story. Graduated from Western Kentucky University, and I wound up in Evansville in 1998 and began working at the Bauer House, as I said last week. We had a little bit of success while I was there, and I enjoyed it. I remodeled a couple of houses in my early years, made some money. I played golf. I traveled a bit. I had fun on four-wheelers and camping, and did I mention I played a lot of golf? I threw parties. You kind of get the picture. I mean, it was all about me. And I found myself at the age of 33, okay? I had a wife. I had 3 beautiful daughters. I had a great job. She had a good job too. We had just bought our dream house. No debt, car, and a house was about it. And through a series of crooked paths and faithful people, I found my way back to God. Or rather, should I say, God finally caught up with me. Because He had been chasing me all those years. Because that's what the Good Shepherd does, isn't it? I mean, the Good Shepherd always goes after the lost sheep. Life was good for me, for the most part. Or so I thought. And then came that whole call to ministry thing in September of 2004. Told you about that last week. And I wondered, God, why do you have to upset my apple cart? I mean, why couldn't you just be content, God, with the little part of my life that I choose to let you in on? You know, I know I have this calling thing, God, but maybe in 5, 10, 20 years, I'll get around to figuring out what it is you want me to do with it. I remember telling my wife, at the time I said, I love our home, but I got this strange feeling in my gut. I'm not going to be here long. I don't know why. Is that weird? That's odd, isn't it? Over the next couple of months, it was weeks, months, God drew me closer and closer and closer to Himself. And in November of that same year, then I was literally, physically, theoretically, figuratively brought to my knees as my marriage ended in divorce. It was not something I wanted. It was not something that I expected. It was completely out of left field. I mean, prior to the events that led to me leaving my home for that last night, I sat in my car and I felt compelled, I was almost guided to read 2 passages. One shared with you last week. I know the plans I have for you, says God. And then the second passage that I read that night was Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Those were verses that I learned whenever I was a kid in the Bible Bowl, but I felt compelled to read them. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Submit to Him or acknowledge Him, and He'll make your path straight. And I remember thinking in my mind, I was thinking, God, this is not a path that I want to travel down. Are you sure that I can trust you? Because this is not what I want. And shortly after that night, I found myself with nothing. I mean, besides the support of my parents and my sisters, I found myself with nothing. And it was then that I realized God was all I had. I also realized something else. I realized that really God was all that I needed. I mean, I've always been the type of person that I was content in a crowd having fun, or I was content all by myself. I would be happy no matter where I was or what the circumstances. But I have to be honest with you. Not being able to tuck my little girls in bed every night. Not being able to get up when my 2.5-year-old cried, Daddy, as she often did in the middle of the night. That was hard. That was hard. And I found myself in a very dark place. And still, it is one of the most difficult times I've ever experienced in my life. It was definitely a crooked path, and it was not one that I wanted to be on. After praying for almost a year that God would bring somebody into my life who would love me and would appreciate me, very resistant to engaging in social behavior at this point, I met Dolly. And we began our relationship. We really wasn't a relationship because neither one of us wanted a relationship. We just wanted somebody to have some good conversation with. And before we decided to get married, which coincidentally, we talked around the M word. We never actually said marriage. We talked around the M word. It was during that conversation that I shared with her that I have this call to ministry, or I had this call to ministry. And right now I don't feel that God's calling me to that, but sometime down the road, He may He may call. And if He calls, I have to tell you that the answer is going to be yes. Because, see, I've tried this whole running thing, and that didn't work out so well for me. And so the answer will be yes. Well, after she caught her breath, and after she picked her chin literally up off the floor, because I am not that pastorly, and I was not that pastorly. And I told her, I said, I'm not so sure where this crooked path is going to lead us, but I can promise you it's going to be one heck of a ride. And she said, Chris, whatever God calls you to, and wherever He leads you, wherever He leads us, that's where we'll go. And so, along with her came my 2 bonus daughters, Chandler and Amanda. And so we found ourselves with a new home, and daughters 13, 10, 9, 3, and 2. Talk about a crooked path. Blending our family was not easy. It was not easy. There were times, I think 3 or 4 months in, we looked at each other and said, what in the heck have we done? But I'm thankful that I wasn't in control. Our family began attending the Turning Point United Methodist Church on the west side of Evansville. After we got married, we both left our churches intentionally because we wanted a new beginning. We wanted a new start together with our family. And it wasn't long before that pit, that uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, that lack of peace came back. And I was hard to live with, and I was up in the middle of the night again. And so I shared with my pastor, about this sort of thing again, different pastor at this time. And bluntly he asked me, he said, Chris, have you ever preached? I said, not intentionally, no. And he said, you see, we're putting together this team of people because there's 2 small churches out in rural Posey County that don't have pastors. And we want a team of people that you'll go there and deliver the message once a month, a couple times a month, that sort of thing. Is that something you'd be interested in? I said, not really, but I opened my mouth, so yeah, I guess okay. So I guess God meant for me to be on that team because as paths would take us, I wound up in July of 2008. I found that I was the only one left on the team. And one of the churches dissolved. They chose to sell their building. And so I was the pastor of St. Paul's United Methodist Church on St. Philip's Road in rural Posey County. No training, just me. And so we had a blast with those 25 people. Seminary began in September that year, and in February of 2009, God opened the door for me to leave my well-paying, full-time, secure job to enter the ministry at Methodist Temple. And I became the associate pastor there. I joke, and there's a little bit of truth in every sarcasm, right? I joke that they found the most unqualified associate pastor that they could find. Because if there was any success at all, there would be no doubt who was responsible for the success. And the first time that I stepped out onto that chancel, that stage area, and I found myself looking at 300 people as opposed to the 25 that I was so comfortable in front of, I began to wonder, has my mouth written a check that I cannot cash? Because I was so underqualified. And that's kind of how I feel now, to some extent. Inexperienced. I don't have 20 years worth of ministry experience. And underqualified for the leadership that God has placed me in. And I didn't ask for this. But this is the crooked path that God has led me on. And so, I guess with that said, if there is any success here whatsoever, don't look at me. We'll know who's responsible for it. You see, God is the reason why we do what we do. God is the reason for our worship. God is the reason for our giving. God is the reason for our living. And I've heard it said this is a loving church. But we love because God first loved us. It is a response. And we can trust God because He has proven Himself trustworthy. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. See, sometimes what you see or what you think you see or what your brain processes is not the way things really are. And I don't know about yours, but sometimes my heart lies to me and doesn't tell me the truth. But you can trust in God. And it says that if you will submit to God, if you will acknowledge Him in everything that you do, in your walking, your talking, your waking, your sleeping, your giving, your doing, that He will make your paths straight. You see, two roads diverged in a yellow wood. And I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference.